Hey everybody, Steve here. So I just want to take a few minutes and talk to you about a GoFundMe campaign. And before I get into details and explain why I am sharing this GoFundMe out of all of the thousands and thousands of GoFundMes that I could be talking to you about, I just want to read what the GoFundMe page actually says so you know what the situation is that people are raising money for. And then I'll tell you a little bit more about my personal connection to it. So the GoFundMe headline here is, "Good Man and Pro Wrestling Brother Needs Our Help." On September 26, 2022, John Rambo unfortunately left this life for a brief time. For 8 minutes, medical staff in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania fought to save his life. They did a phenomenal job at getting his heart beating again. He then spent 4 days on a ventilator, and it left John in a very bad shape physically and mentally. Rambo is currently in a rehabilitation facility, quickly improving each day through hard work, but he will be without any income or financial assistance until he can return to work. John also requires 12 hours a week of dialysis treatments. In his 33 years in the business, John Rambo helped and touched countless lives. He started many careers and helped others pursue their dreams at his House of Payne events. He gave fans over 1,500 free shows to enjoy, as well as the talent the opportunity to hone their skills on a weekly basis. If you know John Rambo, you know he's been one of the good guys in the business. With ever-mounting medical expenses, let's do what we can to help out this true pro wrestling legend. Please help in any way you can. Every dollar helps. And up there at the top, there's a picture of Rambo from a few years ago. That's not his real name, of course. His real name, I think, is John Kretzman. I hope that's okay that I say that, John. I think it's relatively well known. But he got the name John Rambo and the gimmick John Rambo when he was young in the business. I think he wrestled in Memphis under the name John Maxwell early on. And then he moved to Portland and wrestled in Portland, Oregon, in the Pacific Northwest. There's like a million different Portlands. Portland, Oregon. And he got the John Rambo gimmick because he looks a little bit like Sylvester Stallone. So, John Rambo, it's a cool wrestling name. And that has been his wrestling gimmick ever since. And after wrestling in the Pacific Northwest and all over the country and all around the world, he eventually found his way back here to this area, here in Hagerstown, in Western Maryland, and he took over what was the wrestling school in Hagerstown. Believe it or not, Hagerstown had a wrestling school for many, many years. And it was called the Superior Pro Wrestling Training Center. And it was called that because it was founded by another wrestler who was also a local wrestling star named Neil Superior. And unfortunately, Neil Superior passed away at a very young age. And John came in and took over the wrestling school. And one of the things that John did when he took over the wrestling school was he started holding free weekly shows that were open to the public that his wrestling students would work on. And he would also bring in like more experienced veteran pro wrestlers from around the area, and they would sometimes work with each other or work with the students. And it was a way of allowing the pro wrestling students the opportunity to work in front of a crowd and to continue their training, but in a kind of a safe, still in a kind of a training kind of environment, but in front of an audience, which is something that every professional wrestler needs to get good at, because if you can't get the people to react to what you're doing, there's not really much of a point in doing it. Because if the people don't react to your matches, they don't react to you, they don't learn to love you or hate you, then they're not going to want to buy tickets to come and see you, and there's no pro wrestling business. So, but that was one of the things that John did with the wrestling school, which he rechristened the House of Payne, and they had free wrestling matches every Wednesday night, and eventually I think they also held them every Wednesday and Saturday for a while. But where I come in is about 22 years ago, when I was younger than I am now, and I was about 20. Of course, back then I was still a huge wrestling fan, as I am now. In fact, I may have been an even bigger wrestling fan back then, because the wrestling business in general was just a lot hotter back then than it is now. But I and some friends of mine who were also wrestling fans would go to the House of Payne Wednesday night matches in Hagerstown at the wrestling school every week. And it became one of my most cherished events. I loved going to the House of Payne and watching the wrestling students and watching these free pro wrestling shows every week. And it was like you got a free wrestling show, because yes, there were matches, and most of the wrestlers were trainees, but a lot of them were good. And it wasn't just wrestling matches, although I was mostly there for the matches, and I still am primarily a wrestling fan because I like watching wrestling matches. But they would also do interviews and angles. There were storylines that carried on from week to week. It was like a real wrestling show. And it was wonderful. And it was free as long as you got there early enough that you got a seat, because seating was very limited. There was only about probably 50 seats, if even that, because there was only room in the school for a couple of rows of chairs on two sides of the ring. The ring's kind of set up back in a corner there in the old Neil Superior Wrestling School. But if you got there early enough, or you called ahead or emailed ahead and reserved seats, which I eventually started doing, you got in, and you just got to sit there for 2 hours and see a great local wrestling show. It was awesome. And Rambo himself, John, would get in the ring, not every single show, but every once in a while, he would get in the ring with the wrestlers and either wrestle with one of the more experienced guys that had come in to help, or wrestle some of the students and sort of give them a chance to get in the ring with a veteran and work in front of people and get better at their craft. And it was magical. If you were a wrestling fan and you were in the Hagerstown area and you never got to go see a live training matches show at the House of Payne, you really missed out. It's some of my favorite memories of going to live wrestling that I still have to this day. I never really knew John personally. John and I are Facebook friends, and we interacted a little bit in real life back in the day, and also over email and message boards. There used to be a House of Pain message board back in the day. And John, even though he was one of the tops, actually, I would say probably the top star of the NWL, our local professional wrestling organization, which he also helped to promote, and was the NWL champion of for many years. And also the lead trainer and operator of the wrestling school. Part of his job was making time to interact with fans on this message board. And imagine this guy who is at that point like a 15, almost 20-year veteran of the pro wrestling business. I guess maybe if it was 2000, he was maybe a 10, 15-year veteran, something like that. But he'd been in the pro wrestling business for a long time. He had wrestled all over the country, all over the world, earned a living as a pro wrestler. Now, in addition to that, he also is running this wrestling school, and it's a grind because, he's not like a superstar, right? He's not like on TV every week and being able to promote this wrestling school. It's at an independent level, and I'm sure it was a grind, and I'm sure it was a source of great stress. But in the midst of all that, he takes time to talk to a bunch of us marks on the message board, and he was always so cool and so patient and so indulgent with our dumb mark fucking fantasy booking and armchair booking of like the training fed for the local wrestling school. Like we knew better than the guy who ran the thing and was a veteran of the business, but he was always really cool and really gracious, and while also always keeping it real. And he gave me the impression of a really cool guy. I don't know him personally. We're not best friends or anything. In fact, this said that his medical emergency happened over a month ago on September 26th. I didn't even find out about it until over the weekend. So it's not like John and I are like, super close. But after I found out about it, I knew. And by the way, thank you very much to our mutual Facebook friend, Vincent McLordington, Vincent McLordington, who smartened me up to John having this happen to him so I could then make this video and pass it along to you. Because I didn't know about it. So John, I don't know if you're going to watch this, but if you watch this, I hope that this is okay. And I hope that this helps you out. And if you are a wrestling fan watching this, especially if you're watching this and you do happen to know John and you've seen him wrestle before, or especially if you remember going to House of Pain matches in Hagerstown, or I think they had him in Chambersburg for a while too. They may still be having them in Chambersburg. I'm not sure what the current status of the school is. The school moved from Hagerstown to Chambersburg a few years ago, and I don't know what the current status of it is. But if you remember John, or remember the House of Pain, remember the Superior Pro Wrestling Training Center, or if you're just a wrestling fan, and especially if you're a fan of independent wrestling and local wrestling, and you can afford it, please donate to this GoFundMe. Help John out with his medical bills. It's tragic that anybody has to go through this. It's tragic that anybody has to suffer a medical crisis. And then the next thing is, after you survive, that's the good news. And then it's not only do you have to deal with your recovery, but how am I going to pay the medical bills? And if you happen to be someone where your main line of work for the last 30 years was being a pro wrestler, well, unfortunately and somewhat infamously, pro wrestlers don't have a labor union. Pro wrestlers don't have a professional association. Pro wrestlers don't have guaranteed medical care or retirement or anything like that. So if something happens to you, unfortunately, as has happened to John, you could find yourself with very limited resources to deal with that, hence the need for this GoFundMe. So if this means anything to you, if John Rambo means anything to you, if pro wrestling means anything to you, if you can afford it, please donate to this GoFundMe and help John out. And even if you can't afford it, please share it around, share this video, or better yet, just share the link directly. It's linked in the video description right here. Share it around on all your social media feeds and encourage other people to share it and to donate to help out John Rambo, because I am grateful to him for all of the things he gave to me as a pro wrestling fan, in the ring and out of the ring. And I hope that this is our chance in some small way to help him out and to pay that back. So John, best wishes, best of luck, speedy recovery. And thank you so much for everything that you did for me as a mark, as a pro wrestling fan, because I will never forget it. And yeah, take care.